Rain slid down the tall glass windows of Harbor Street Cafe, blurring the city lights into soft streaks of gold and gray. Inside, the air smelled of roasted beans and warm bread. Claire Matthews sat alone at a corner table, her coat draped over the chair beside her, her fingers circling the rim of a mug she had barely touched. She had not planned to stop there. After a long shift at the hospital, her feet aching and her mind crowded with unfinished charts and quiet worries, she had simply turned into the cafe instead of driving home. The thought of her empty kitchen and reheated leftovers had felt heavier than usual. She checked her phone. No new messages. Claire exhaled slowly and stirred her coffee, watching the cream dissolve. She told herself she was just tired. Everyone felt this way sometimes. Married life had seasons. She knew that. The bell above the door chimed. She barely looked up at first. Then she froze. The man shaking rain from his jacket near the entrance looked familiar in a way that tugged at memory. Tall. Brown hair slightly messy from the weather. Calm posture. Ethan Parker. Her eyes widened. He scanned the room, then spotted her. His face shifted into surprise, then a warm, uncertain smile. "Claire," he said, walking closer. She stood halfway from her chair before sitting back down, laughing softly. "Ethan? I can't believe this." "Yeah," he said, pulling out the chair across from her. "I thought that was you, but I wasn't sure." "Wow, it's been what? 5 years?" "Closer to 7, he replied. They shook hands, then awkwardly laughed at the formality of it. They had once spent long shifts side by side, joking during late breaks, sharing vending machine dinners. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Bad day," she admitted. "Needed caffeine and quiet." He nodded. "Same city, same weather problems." A barista waved from the counter. Ethan lifted a finger. "Mind if I grab something and come back?" "Go ahead." When he returned with a black coffee, the chair scraped softly as he sat. The conversation picked up easily, too easily. They talked about work. He ran a rehab clinic now. She was still nursing, though in a different department. They laughed about old co-workers, how serious everyone had been back then, how young they all were. Claire relaxed without noticing when it happened. Then her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced down. "Mark, running late again. Meeting went long. Don't wait up." Her shoulders sank before she could stop herself. Ethan noticed. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. Just, normal stuff." She took a sip of coffee, misjudged the distance, and spilled a few drops onto the table. "Oh." Before she could reach for a napkin, Ethan slid one across to her. "Here." She stared at it for a second. Such a small thing. She wiped the spill, but her hand slowed. Her chest tightened. The words slipped out before she thought them through. "My husband never does this." The moment stretched. Ethan's smile faded just slightly, not hurt, but surprised. "Oh," he said quietly. Claire looked up, realizing what she had said. Heat rushed to her face. I didn't mean." "It's fine," he replied gently. But something had already changed. She folded the napkin carefully, suddenly aware of her own heartbeat. The cafe felt quieter. The rain louder. They looked at each other, unsure how to step back to where they had been 5 seconds earlier. And neither of them quite managed to. Claire pushed the napkin aside, but the words she had spoken still hovered between them, heavier than the rain outside. Ethan sat across from her, calm, but she could feel him measuring, reading, understanding something she hadn't intended to reveal. She wished she could take it back, but it was out now, and it changed everything. "I didn't mean to say that," she murmured, twisting her fingers around the edge of her coffee cup. Ethan shook his head gently. It's okay. Honestly, it's human. You noticed something. His eyes softened, studying her without judgment. Sometimes noticing small things is all it takes to feel seen. Claire's throat tightened. She looked down at the table. It wasn't just about noticing anymore. It was about the longing she didn't want to admit, the quiet ache that had been building for months, maybe years. Her life with Mark was steady, predictable, safe, but in this moment, sitting here across from Ethan, steady and safe felt empty. "How's married life?" Ethan asked, careful, curious but not intrusive. "Comfortable," Claire said quickly. She forced the word out, even though it wasn't exactly the truth. He nodded, accepting the answer on the surface. "Comfort can be nice," he said. "Yes, it can," she admitted, her voice softer now. Then, almost against her will, she added, "But it can also be lonely." Her words hung in the air. Ethan didn't speak immediately. He just leaned back, letting her honesty settle in between them. When he finally spoke, it was low, deliberate, and sincere. "A lot of people feel that way and don't admit it." Claire's heart thudded in her chest. Something in her tightened, not with fear, exactly, but with awareness. She realized just how much she had been holding back, how carefully she had been stacking her life into routines that didn't challenge her, that didn't feel alive. Sitting here with Ethan, talking without pretending, made her realize how lonely her comfort really was. Ethan's gaze softened, steady but warm. He didn't need to say more. She felt the weight of unspoken understanding passing between them, subtle but electric. She looked down at her coffee cup again, tracing the rim with her finger. She had to remind herself to breathe. The small cafe noises, the hiss of the espresso machine, the quiet chatter from a couple at the next table, the rain tapping on the window, felt magnified, intimate, almost conspiratorial. "I'm glad we ran into each other," Ethan said, breaking the silence. His voice had a quiet sincerity that made her pause. Claire felt a flutter she hadn't felt in years. "Me too," she admitted, almost too softly. And just like that, the world outside the cafe didn't matter. The rain continued, relentless but gentle, but inside, a shift had occurred. She was no longer just Claire Matthews, married, steady, predictable. She was Claire Matthews, noticing, feeling, questioning, aware of a longing she couldn't ignore. For a moment, the conversation paused. Neither of them looked away. The air between them was charged with possibility, with the recognition of emotions too easily ignored in everyday life. The simple napkin, the small act of kindness, had cracked open something neither had expected. Claire checked the time reluctantly. "I should go," she said. Her voice was quieter than before, but the weight of hesitation made her pause at the door. Ethan stood as well, his coat in hand. "Yeah, of course." Outside, the rain had softened into mist, the city lights reflecting on the wet pavement. She stepped out, and the cool air felt different, sharper, fresher, full of unspoken questions. "Hey, Claire." Ethan called softly before she reached her car. She turned, heart skipping. "I'm glad I ran into you," he said again, with no awkwardness this time, only honesty. "Me too," she replied, and meant it. Driving home, the city passed in streaks of gray and amber, but nothing felt ordinary. That simple moment, a napkin, a word, a glance, had shifted something deep inside her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing: she could no longer ignore the part of her that longed to be seen, noticed, and understood. And in that quiet, rainy night, Claire realized her life might never feel quite the same again. Claire tried to push the cafe encounter out of her mind, telling herself it was just a coincidence, a brief moment of nostalgia. Yet, even as she returned to her routine, Ethan's image lingered, his soft smile, the way he had noticed her spill, the warmth in his eyes. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't dangerous. But it stirred something she hadn't felt in years. 2 days later, her phone buzzed. She almost didn't check it. "Ethan, hope your week's been lighter than that day at the cafe." Her fingers froze above the screen. She typed back carefully. "Claire, some days are better than others. Thanks for checking in." The conversation started small, innocent. He asked about her shifts, joked about the weather, shared a story about a patient's dog that had wandered into his clinic. She smiled, laughed even, something she hadn't done in a long time. The messages came more often, never intrusive, never too long. Just gentle nudges that reminded her someone was thinking of her, not her as a nurse, not her as Mark's wife, but her. Claire started waiting for his texts without admitting it, reading them multiple times, feeling her heart lift with each one. Mark didn't notice, or maybe he did but didn't care enough to comment. Evenings blurred into routine. Dinner was quiet. Claire talked about her shift, Mark scrolled through his phone or emails, offering small acknowledgments without really listening. The contrast was stark. Ethan listened. Ethan noticed. One afternoon, Ethan sent another message. "Ethan, want to walk by the riverside after work? Just to catch up." Claire hesitated. She glanced at her calendar, at the familiar comfort of home, at Mark who would likely be absorbed in his own world. Almost instinctively, she typed no. But something inside her, the restless, quiet part, pressed her to type yes. The riverside was peaceful. Trees lined the path, their leaves rustling in the breeze. The sun dipped low, reflecting off the water in streaks of gold. Ethan was already there when she arrived, coat on, hands in his pockets, smiling as if he had been expecting her all along. They walked slowly, speaking in easy, measured tones. No pressure. No expectation. Just presence. And for Claire, it felt like breathing after years underwater. "This feels nice," she said, glancing at him. "Yeah. It does," he replied. His voice carried calm, sincerity, and something more, an awareness that made her heart ache. They stopped by the water's edge. Silence fell, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The wind tugged at her hair. She felt the weight of her own honesty pressing in. She wanted to tell him everything, but the words remained trapped, teasing her. "You seem tired," Ethan said suddenly. Not physically tired, but emotionally. He was perceptive, and that cut deeper than she expected. "I think I am," she admitted, surprising herself. The confession left her exposed but strangely relieved. "So am I," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers, steady and warm. That look, the way he held her truth without judgment, made her heart race. She realized she had been starving for this kind of connection, this kind of understanding. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The world around them, the water, the trees, the evening light, faded. All that remained was a quiet understanding, a spark neither had planned but both felt. Claire's chest tightened, not with guilt, but with longing. She knew this was the edge of something. Not wrong, not dramatic, not fully understood. Just real. As the sun slipped below the horizon, she felt the weight of the life she had built pressing on her. Mark, home, routine, comfort, they were safe, predictable, familiar. And yet, after a few hours with Ethan, they felt dull in comparison. The walk ended, but nothing returned to normal. The messages, the moments, the awareness of her own longing had shifted her. She drove home with the sunset in her eyes, knowing that things were no longer simple, and that she could no longer pretend that everything felt right the way it used to. Something new had entered her life, quietly, gently, and it had opened a door that might never close. Claire drove home with the evening sky streaked in pink and gold, her mind spinning. Nothing had happened, not really. She had walked, talked, and laughed with Ethan, and yet her heart felt as if it had been nudged awake after years of routine. Every familiar street, every streetlight, felt sharper somehow, as if the city itself had noticed the shift inside her. When she pulled into the driveway, Mark was already in the kitchen, reheating leftovers, humming softly to himself. His presence was calm, familiar, safe. He smiled at her without looking up. "Hey. Food's almost ready." Claire nodded, forcing herself to smile back. She watched him, noticing details she hadn't thought about in years, the way his sleeve rolled slightly above his wrist, the faint laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, the ease with which he moved around their small kitchen. She loved him, she reminded herself. She had chosen him. Dinner was quiet. Mark chatted about work, about emails, about a meeting he had scheduled for next week, but the words barely registered. Claire found herself thinking of Ethan, his attentiveness, his subtle warmth, the way he had noticed her small moments. She tried to push the thoughts away, telling herself they were harmless, fleeting. But they weren't. After clearing the dishes, she walked past Mark as he went to the living room, folding laundry and humming the same tune. The mundane rhythm of home, the predictability, suddenly felt heavier than usual. Claire's chest tightened as if the walls of their life had shrunk just slightly around her. Later, sitting on the edge of their bed, she stared at the ceiling. The room smelled faintly of Mark's cologne and the cotton sheets. Safe. Comfortable. Predictable. And yet, her mind replayed the past few days, the cafe, the rain, the napkin, the riverside walk. Ethan's words, his quiet understanding, the way he had seen her without expectation, it lingered in her chest like a soft spark. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up, heart skipping. "Ethan, today meant something to me. I just wanted you to know that." Her fingers trembled slightly as she stared at the message. Across the room, Mark moved around obliviously, humming. She typed, deleted, typed again. Finally, she pressed send. "Claire, it meant something to me too." The screen glowed softly in her hands. She didn't need to read the message twice, she felt the truth of it in her chest. Her heart was racing, not with guilt exactly, but with recognition. Recognition of longing, of desire for connection, for being truly seen. Claire placed the phone down and leaned back against the pillows. She thought of the door that had opened during those quiet hours with Ethan, the one she hadn't realized she had been standing in front of for years. Once a door like that opens, it doesn't close easily. Mark came into the room a few minutes later, asking about her day. She gave him a polite smile and a short answer. He nodded, distracted by the TV. Claire looked out the window at the night sky. The city lights reflected on the pavement wet from earlier rain. She felt alive in a way she hadn't felt for a long time. This wasn't about betrayal. It wasn't about anger or deceit. It was about awakening. About realizing that life could feel more than routine. About understanding that comfort and safety were not the same as feeling truly seen, truly alive. Claire closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She didn't know what the next day would bring, or the next conversation, or how her marriage would shift. She only knew that she could no longer ignore the spark Ethan had lit, the door he had gently cracked open. And in that quiet moment, with the soft hum of her home around her and the glow of her phone fading beside her, Claire understood something profound. Once a door like that opens, you can never pretend you never saw the light. She lay back, heart full of questions, anticipation, and something fragile yet thrilling. Something had changed. And for the first time in years, Claire wasn't afraid to feel it.